Welcome to the Everyday Rabbi. We're here with another podcast. The one and only, my father, Rabbi Sholom Dubov, Senior Director, Executive Director of Chabad of Greater Orlando. And I think that's what we'll talk about today. How that happened, how we all got here. We did a podcast a couple weeks back with my brother, Mendy. We grew up in Orlando, but how did we get to Orlando? How did the whole story start? Without further ado, the podcast. Ready? All right. Welcome to the I have the Everyday's Rabbi's Rabbi. So everyone always asks me, the rabbi's who's the rabbi's rabbi? Every rabbi has to have a rabbi, and every rabbi has a father, and who the father was and where he came from, and if he was educated and where he was educated. That's already part of history. But it's an utmost pleasure to be sitting with you, and I think this was a couple weeks in the making to finally sit down and have a great conversation of our origins, where we came from, how we got here. So
Pleasure's all mine.
How did we get here? What's the backstory?
So I was raised in, I would say, at the footstool of the Rebbe, born and raised in Lubavitch, Crown Heights, Borough Park, Crown Heights. And, all my years, teen years, or even younger, you see these senior shluchim coming from all over the world for a 1 or 2 day visit, because they live anywhere from Morocco to Italy.
Shluchim being?
Shluchim mean Chabad emissaries that were sent out by the Rebbe as early as 1959, 1958. So these shluchim were 20 years my senior, maybe 25 years. And they were like images you look up to. Today people look up to basketball players and to stars, and that was our heroes. And these guys would walk in, they didn't make an air about themselves, but their presence was felt. And we always dreamed of becoming a shliach, not realizing that it was really that accessible.
What was the perception of a shliach in those days?
So today, when you speak to anyone who knows a little bit about the Chabad network, there's thousands of shluchim. When I was around, I met hundreds, and that was huge. We thought that was the whole world, because each one represented an entire region, either a state or a country. And, they were there to represent Yiddishkeit and to do whatever it took to move the marker of Jewish observance and practice and education forward. And they were accomplishing their mission on a very basic, established, fundamental level.
So for perspective, some of these places that the shluchim were going to were devoid of active Jewish life, or had a muted Jewish life in terms of community, in terms of activity. They were coming to places where there was really nothing, almost nothing, or in some cases literally nothing, right?
So the best way I would understand it when I was a teenager is one of the things the Rebbe instituted was to walk during the holiday to a nearby shul and uplift their spirits, usually around Shavuos time, sometimes Simchas Torah. So I would go every Simchas Torah before the Rebbe started HaKafis, before the Rebbe started his own celebration of 770. The Bachram walked all over, some even married men. So we went to shuls that the HaKafis started at 7:15 and was over 7:35. And they basically took the Torahs out of the ark respectfully and dutifully and walked around the bima and put it back, said Good Yontiv, and went home.
This was
the religious. So the job of these young Bachrim, young students and young rabbis, was to really raise the level of joy and participation. So whenever the Bachrim used to walk in, the door would open. The 300-400 seat shul had like 20 men, and all of a sudden the Bachrim would come in, sometimes more Bachrim than people that were in the shul. The Lubavitchers are here, and automatically a smile would appear on their face, and the whole atmosphere was charged with a new sense of meaning and importance. The rabbi, wonderful rabbi, but his job wasn't to inspire. His job wasn't to jump around with the Torah. And these young Bachram and rabbis would take the Torah and jump around the bima and give it to people to dance and say, "Do you have any l'chaim?" And they say, "Oh, I think we have a closet somewhere." And they bring out the l'chaims. You could see they were very uncomfortable. The point is, at the end of the hour that they stayed, which was, some people say, this is the longest hakafas I ever been in my life, you could see that they went home with a renewed enthusiasm and an infectious positivity about Yiddishkeit, which hopefully lasted till the next time we came. So the same thing on a grander and a more permanent level, when the shluchim went out to a community, it wasn't so much that there was not Judaism there. It could have been Judaism, but it was stale. It was monotonous. It was obligatory. It was perfunctory, rather than putting life into what we had to do. And that's really what Hasidus is. Hasidus infused Yiddishkeit with life. It kind of put a booster battery into the existing Shulchan Aruch and the existing code of Jewish practice.
So you grew up in Brooklyn. This was a common occurrence around the holidays, and you meet these heroes, these supermen and women,
which, by the way, couldn't come during holidays because they had their own services and programs there.
Right. So and there's this movement starting of this excitement, this joy in the air, this thrill of going on shluchas.
Well, the key was the Rebbe would speak every Shabbos that there was associated with some important Jewish timeline, whether it was Yutas Kislev as a Hasidic holiday, or Hanukkah, or Purim, or Pesach, the Yom Tovim, all the biblical holidays were always a Fabring, and the message, every talk that the Rebbe ever gave, most scholarly to the most simple explanation of a commentary of Rashi and the Chumash, ended off, which was called, what is the practical lesson in life? What's the takeaway? Well, how do we apply this? What's the aha moment of the talk? What does it mean? And the Rebbe would often say, Loi ledrasha kasina, I'm not here to make speeches. I'm not here to make an enlightened excitement about Judaism per se, but what's the takeaway? What do we take out of it? And most of the talks, in my teen years, a little older, was about not being satisfied with you yourself being observant, and you yourself learning, and you yourself davening, and you yourself have your Judaism in order, so to speak, to whatever level you have it, and whatever level you don't have it is irrelevant. Bring whatever you know to another Yid. The proverbial, if you know an Aleph, teach an Aleph. If you know a Beis, teach a Beis. You know Aleph Beis, wow, you can teach even more. And that was the constant message. And hearing it day by day, I wondered why there's 500-600 men in the room when every one of them knows an Aleph and they could be going somewhere teaching the Aleph. And sometimes the Rebbe would actually share his frustration that not enough people are doing what needs to be done to bring Yiddishkeit. The line the Rebbe often quoted is Ufaratzta. Ufaratzta means the blessing that God gave Yaakov, Jacob, you will burst forward. But the Rebbe meant and interpreted the word literally, go forth to a place that has not enough Yiddishkeit, or your participation there will amplify and boost the level of Yiddishkeit and have an impact on the Jews outside of your own immediate environment.
So I heard from one of these rabbis who actually did go out in the 70s, early 70s, that, and you could check all these talks, they're all transcribed, they're all published, and you could sort of go back in time and see what the Rebbe was speaking about in certain years, in the 1960s and 70s. Almost every single time I found ending with a lesson that was either overtly or implicitly implying the necessity to leave Karnite, essentially. But then you found all these older Hasidim who, for whatever reason, didn't leave. Why do you think it was so captivating or so moving to the younger generation? What the Rebbe, he was saying that the Rebbe spoke almost uniquely to the younger generation after the older generation almost didn't heed his words. I'll talk to the Bachrim, he said. And he was a Bacher back then. I mean, this is 1960s. And it became his mission. It became obviously the Bachrim who left afterwards. And that's really where the throngs of shluchim and shluchas throughout the world started from. I mean, the 60s was like the first wave that we talk about. So what was happening in the Bachrim world then that you think changed the dynamic?
I think that part of the mentality of the senior rabbis, I'm talking about ones older than the Rebbe,
Like your grandfather.
who's sitting behind the Rebbe in these talks, or sitting even in the front, in the seats, came from a broken, difficult, challenging childhood and young life in Russia, in Europe, in Ukraine, and to them have the luxury of a place you could go to shul every day without having stones thrown at you or getting arrested by the local police. Having a yeshiva where you could send your kids to freely, having a mikveh that you could use daily, having all the necessities and all the luxuries of available things to purchase, whether they're kosher, whether they're tefillin, immediately at need, was something that was such a phenomenal miracle for them that they couldn't possibly imagine leaving it. The Rebbe's message is, take this miracle and bring it to other communities. Let's multiply this miracle by 100, by 1,000, by 10,000. And so at one point, when it became apparent that the elderly kind of were set in their ways or couldn't imagine themselves being the pioneers Rebbe wanted his Hasidim to be, he started speaking to the Bachram, like you said, the young 18, 19-year-olds, and listening to the Rebbe for 4 or 5 years till you're 22, 23, ready to get married. The Rebbe guy charted the plan to motivate young married couples to go out. And as it's famous, the Rebbe would actually tell people where to go until a certain point where people said, oh, I can't go there, or that's too far, or that's too difficult. And the Rebbe said, you know what? You make an offer where you want to go, and the administration will approve it.
So what was your story? How did you end up Orlando per se, and what was the process?
So the Rebbe would be talking about going out and establishing new outposts of Yiddishkeit. I think the term Chabad house was used, but it was not.
Lubavitch house was then
it was not.
more
It was
common,
not a
yeah.
vernacular. It was being a shliach, opening up a branch of Chabad, and the talk as when I was of marriageable age, that all the cities are already taken, all the places are taken. There's not much really we could do, because the way it worked is Rabbi Chodakov, the Rebbe's chief of staff, who was the one who coordinated all these establishing of Chabad centers, would first send one shliach, one representative of the Rebbe called America's representative, the organization that the Rebbe founded, America's Linyan Chinuch, to an area that he would be given a territory, usually a country if it was outside of the United States, or a state if it was inside the United States. So the first rabbi, the first Chabad representative of the state, was called the Merkez Shliach. He was in charge of the whole state. What does it mean, in charge? That he had to, first of all, take responsibility of whatever Yiddishkeit had to be provided for in that state. By the way, also to the observant community. We're not just here for non-observant people. We're here for everyone. Whatever level of Yiddishkeit it is, to bolster it and to increase it and to expand it. And again, to give it life, to give it Hasidische Warmkeit, a Hasidic warmth. And then that rabbi would be responsible for bringing rabbis under him, couples under him, to establish areas within his jurisdiction, within his territory.
So just to clarify, every shlichus was a couple sent out on shlichus. So it was a shliach, which is masculine, shlucha, feminine, and they were tasked to bring Judaism as a couple to a community, and then in turn to hire more help as needed.
And expand, exactly. And depending on how big the territory was, depending on how many Yidden lived there, would be a question of how many they would take out. So the first rabbi to Italy would be in charge of the whole Italy, first rabbi of France, and so on and so forth. In the United States, the first rabbi to the state of Florida was Rabbi Korf. But interestingly enough, there was a person under him who was in charge of the Central Florida region. And he met my younger brother, and he said, "Do you know anyone who's looking to be a shliach? I have a shlichus available in a city called Orlando." And Orlando was not a known city in New York at that time. It was famous for Disney World, and most Hasidim in Crown Heights probably were never in Disney World and maybe never even saw a picture of Mickey Mouse. So it was not like a famous, attraction or famous location. But my brother did say that my older brother just got engaged and he's looking for a place. So this gentleman came over to me and he said, "How about Orlando?" And I said, "Sure." To me, Orlando and China and Timbuktu, whatever, it's all the same. Well, like wherever we could go and have an impact. And so we got married in September, Elul,
Year
1984. And a few weeks later, during the intermediate days of Sukkot's holiday, this rabbi paid for a ticket for my wife and I to come to Orlando during Sukkot, which means we had to find a sukkah to eat. And he set that all up for us. And we spent a few days, and we came back right before the second days, which we call Hoshana Rabbah, Shmei Atzes, and Simchas Torah. And we wrote a note to the Rebbe, my wife and I, that we were offered the city of Orlando and the areas around it. And we are asking for the Rebbe's, what we call Haskama and Bracha, which means approval. And
So just real quick, the way it worked in those days was the Rebbe, his office really was upstairs in 770, right? And it was pretty much either he was downstairs for davening or upstairs for learning and came downstairs to inspire the masses, but he was mostly spent time in his office, in his room,
Right.
or at home.
From when the Rebbe arrived in June of 1941 with his wife, literally fleeing the onslaught of the Nazi occupation of France, where the Rebbe was in Nice and Vichy, he came to America on the last boat before the U-boat blockade in 1941. And from the moment that he came until he passed away, he never took a day's vacation. If he was home for a half a day because he wasn't feeling well, it was a phenomenal oddity. Otherwise, he was always there. And it was always known the Rebbe is going to be between his home and his office, which we call the Rebbe's room, the entire time.
So in the early years, the way I remember it was that people would actually go to the Rebbe's office and knock on the door, and if the Rebbe was available, he would let you in. And I guess after the years when the Rebbe's schedule was so tight that there was almost no free time, there was never free time, but you would basically send a note upstairs, and the note would either be submitted or put on the bottom of a pile, whatever it was. You had to wait your turn. So you submitted this note for.
So just to clarify, what you're describing was only the first few years of the Rebbe's leadership. From 1941 till 1950, he served as the administrator for Machne Yisrael, America's Linyan Chinuch, which is the arm of Chabad outreach. When his father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, the sixth Rebbe of Chabad, passed away, the Rebbe accepted the leadership in 1951 and continued to lead. So for the years prior to becoming the Rebbe, and then for the short term afterwards, the Rebbe's door was usually not only unlocked, but open. So you could peek in. If the Rebbe he noticed you, he'd call you in and ask you what you needed. That's how small the Lubavitch was. I have a copy somewhere in my papers of the wedding invitation list for my father's wedding. My father and mother got married 3 days before the previous Rebbe passed away. And they had 52 names of Chabad Hasidim in Crown Heights. That's how small Chabad was. And of course, many.
So when they say you could fit the whole Chabad in a room, and literally,
right. It's squeezed, but in the room. The Rebbe had 5 secretaries. Each one was responsible for a different job, 5 rabbis. And the one responsible for taking care of shluchim going to new places was Rabbi Chodakov. The job he kept until till the end of his life. And that responsibility was to coordinate that shluchim would go to the right place with the right infrastructure available for them to maintain and have a guaranteed future. So so we wrote to the Rebbe that we're ready to take this job, to this position. And we didn't get immediate response in writing, but we did get something much, much greater. And that was that Simchas Torah, which was 3 days after I wrote in, the Rebbe had a farbrang. The Rebbe used to have a farbrang, what we call downstairs, the main shul. The Rebbe would wash right before sunset, right before Shkia, and eat challah, and have a farbrang. Intermittently eat a little piece of bread during the meal. At the end of the meal, he would bench on a cup of wine and use that same wine after they made the Dav Ma'ariv to make Havdalah, and he would pour l'chaim to all the people who wanted. It was called Kosher Bracha, which you see available videos of the Rebbe giving out, lasting to the wee hours of the morning. During that farbrang, the Rebbe would usually talk about a message that related to the coming year, and the Rebbe said, I'm starting a new campaign that's called Shliach Isa Shliach. The Shliach should bring out or appoint another Shliach. Each Chabad emissary should appoint another emissary. And he explained the importance of expanding Chabad programming, and he said that any Shliach who takes upon himself to bring down another Shliach, his office will fund 2/3 of the salary if the person bringing down the Shliach under him will pay 1/3. So we immediately responded the day after Simchas Torah, called Isur Chag, that we would like to sign up for the Shliach Shliach program. And the Rebbe said 2 words, Shayach LaMalach. Malach is Mem Lamed Ches, Merkez Liyan Chinuch, which was the code for Rabbi Chodakov. So I went to the office and I said, what does this mean? They said, you need to make an appointment with Rabbi Chodakov, which I have to tell you was quite unusual, because most shluchim that went out under other shluchim got appointed by the other shliach, and the original mandate given to the main original shliach remained. You didn't meet Rabbi Chodakov again. You could go say Shalom Aleichem to him, but the formal meeting would not take place to what we would call the underlings, because it was already assigned to the primary person. And so this was kind of unusual for us, but we arranged for the meeting. Rabbi Chodakov's office was, I would say, not exaggerating, a room 8 by 8 square feet, maybe 10 by 10. And it all consisted of a desk and his chair and room for 2 more chairs. If you had the 2 people sitting across his desk, you couldn't close the door without moving the chair. That's how small the office was, and it's still there. And so I went in with this young man who took me down, and he asked me who I am. And he didn't say, what's your name? He said, who's your father? And instead of
That's
saying,
the way of saying, who are you?
Yeah, instead of saying, who's your wife, who's your father-in-law? And knowing both of my families, it was obviously a different conversation. And he gave me the same speech, the same mandate that he would give shluchim who went out for the first time, like shluchim who established new territories and new centers. And basically, in a nutshell, the message was that Chabad representatives are in charge of raising the level of Yiddishkeit for every single person. For a person who knows nothing, it's the proverbial Aleph. For a person who's already learning Chumash, to encourage him to learn Tanya. If he's already learning Tanya, let him learn and teach it to someone. Whatever level we're on. If there's a school, if it's not teaching any Yiddishkeit, try to introduce some Yiddishkeit to the school. If there's already Yiddishkeit, how do we make more Yiddishkeit? How do we infuse it with enthusiasm, with chayas, with simcha, with joy? Whatever level Yiddishkeit is there, there's always an area where we could improve. And that is the Chabad rabbi's job. If the mikveh is okay, make it ideal. If it's ideal, make it beautiful. Always expanding and increasing the Yiddishkeit wherever necessary. At that time, Orlando did not have a mikveh, did not have any observant infrastructure. There was no Orthodox shul, which is actually very surprising because many smaller towns had a Jewish presence that was observant Orthodox or something like that, and they closed because of not having enough support. But Orlando didn't have anything. The best level, the highest level of Yiddishkeit was left of center in terms of the spectrum of observance. So there was a huge challenge. There was no question what we had to do. The question is, where do we start?
So you leave New York, you and your wife, and you come to Orlando. You're all charged up with this idealism and this mission. And what was that like coming to Orlando? What was the reality check?
So one of the things that usually happens to a shliach in the 80s would be there'd been some kind of infrastructure already available, a list of people who would welcome you, some activities or places to live where you would be most receptive. And I didn't have any of that. Not sure if it didn't exist or it wasn't provided, but either way, we went in cold turkey. So we had nowhere to start. So we had a car. And
Where'd you get that from?
So my wife used to teach in Morristown Cheder, the Chabad kids, the children of the shluchim there. And she lived not too far away in a city called Englewood, New Jersey. It was about a 45-minute drive. So with her salary that she was able to receive from her teaching, she was able to pay for a car, and the car got her back and forth to and from school. So we used that car to fill it to the gills. It was a Ford Gremlin. And then we had the rest of the stuff, which wasn't much, is sent on a truck. And we came to Orlando and we stayed in a hotel for a few days on Lee Road. And several couples said, a good place for you to start would be UCF. Become the chaplain for the Jewish students over there. And we later found out that that was the furthest place away from the center of town. So they're basically sending us to the outskirts, far away from us. But we were there for a year and a half, and it was very productive. But we realized we had to move to the center of town if we wanted to have an impact on the wider and broader community.
Didn't I hear somebody send you a check to move to the other side of town later on?
A little further.
Yeah. What was that like, that your first year and a half?
So it was literally figuring out what to do first. So to start a shul or a school without having any names of anything was unrealistic. So we decided we're going to start with a program that would be most receptive and something we could do immediately. And that was Bikur Cholim, hospital visitation. Before HIPAA laws and all these restrictions of privacy, you could go into any hospital, show that you're clergy, and meet the chaplain from the hospital, and they offer you a list of all the patients of that denomination or faith that you belong to. Showing that I was a rabbi, the chaplain was more than gracious to offer me the list of names. And I would take the list of names. There was only 4 hospitals in Orlando at that time. And not having any kids, my wife and I would make the whole Shabbos Thursday night. And Friday morning, we spent the entire day traveling from one hospital to the other and getting the list of names and going to each patient's room and to give them a word of encouragement and wish them a good wish. And we had a Jewish florist that would give us a bunch of flowers, which we left at every bedside, and a Jewish printer printed cards we called Refuah Shlema cards, get well cards, with a little prayer on the back that we would give the patient. Sometimes we'd go into the room, the patient was in therapy, or the patient was being treated for something, so we left the card with the flower on their nightstand, and we went on. And this is what we spent every Friday doing. We made many friends from that, supporters. Some were supporters throughout their entire life. Never came to a Chabad program, but always would support us because they remember that we were the only people that would visit them. That includes even sometimes their own family during the entire stay in the hospital. Sometimes we would put on film with people, and it was the last time and the only time they put on film their whole life. So it was a very important and significant impact that we had. And that was really the first program that we actually started.
What was the reception of the Jewish community to you coming down? What was that like?
So because the Rabbi Chodakov said that we must remain on cordial and respectful terms with everybody, we are officially non-denominational in terms of political, in terms of ideology. We have the Torah, and we have the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, and we follow that without question. But belonging to a specific denomination, belonging to a specific party, we specifically exclude ourselves from that. So we don't join any particular group. We don't align ourselves in any kind of organization that could be a contradiction or a hindrance to belong to another. So we're what they call in Israel al-miflakti, above parties. And that's how we treat ourselves. So because I'm not against anyone and we're for everything Yiddishkeit, my wife and I made a point to visit every Jewish organizational leader and rabbi. And almost everyone welcomed us. And almost everyone said, Orlando is not for you. You really don't know what you're up against. If you want to hang around here, you can hang around here, but you're going to go back home pretty soon. It's not for you.
Weren't there also some negative articles that came out that
so
maybe anonymously or?
Well, not anonymous, no. Two interesting things happened. When we met with the Federation director at that time, who left shortly afterwards, he wrote an article. The title of the article, if I recall, was Lubavitch Comes to Orlando, like the Russians are coming. And he said, one of the quotes, the red flag of concern has been raised with the arrival of Rabbi Sholom von Dubov. Bear was not a name that was known, so they typed it von Dubov, like literally like I'm some kind of alien who's like here to upend whatever Yiddishkeit there was, which was really not our aim at all. Again, our job is to bolster Yiddishkeit. And the other interesting thing was that the first high holiday that we were here, the largest congregation in Orlando, the rabbi used the opportunity for his Yom Kippur Yisker or Kol Nidre sermon to talk about the recent current events in Orlando, the arrival of Chabad, or as he called it, Lubavitch. And he said publicly that supporting Chabad, supporting this young rabbi, is akin to committing suicide. And what he meant to say is that he does not accept our way of Judaism. He doesn't accept our level of kosher, which was non-existent. He doesn't accept our conversions. He doesn't accept our method of prayer. He won't even walk into our sanctuary. And giving him money is basically upending yourself. And his encouragement was not to do so. After the holiday, and I got the message from one of my supporters that was there and heard it, and I got very upset about it. I called some of my colleagues, and they said, Shalom Bear, why are you upset? This is the greatest publicity. 750 people had a captive audience, and the rabbi spending his holiday sermon talking about you. And I realized Liberace once said,
no such thing as bad publicity.
Right, just spell my name right. I'm laughing all the way to the bank. So there's something incredible about that negative energy that's spurring people to want to find out what is this all about. Now, I wouldn't say people came flocking to me with donations afterwards, but it definitely set the tone for they were not any more unfamiliar with what we're doing.
So then I think there was a federation story. The federation called you to, what was it? The synagogue called you to a meeting. Was that after that? That they wanted to. They basically put you on the stage. They would put you on the stand, and they wanted to know what is Chabad and what are you doing here. And there's no Orthodox synagogue. So who are you catering to, if not our own people?
Yeah. Okay. So meeting all the rabbis, I met with a senior rabbi, a conservative rabbi, but had Orthodox smicha. He was raised in an observant home in Liverpool, England, and he was Austrian, I think, at birth. A very strong accent. His name was Rabbi Adler. And Rabbi Adler would learn with me from time to time. He was knowledgeable. And he said, in every community, you got to do whatever you can. And I said, well, Yiddishkeit is Yiddishkeit. You don't compromise. And he said, you do whatever you can. So he said, would you be willing to come and speak to our men's club? I said, sure. He said, every month or two we have a men's club and we have a guest speaker. So we're going to announce, and we set a date. I said, the only thing is I can't speak in the sanctuary from the pulpit, but if you make it in the social hall. He said, oh yeah, it's always in the social hall. Fine. So I heard a day before the men's club event that it was sold out. Everyone came, and it was also open to people in the communities, not just that congregation. Full house. And they served a breakfast, whatever they served, and I got up to speak. I was 24 and a half years old. I don't remember what I said. I remember saying a story about the Baal Shem Tov. I remember saying there's a song about the Baal Shem Tov, and I started singing, and I realized that's not really the best. But and then I concluded by saying, we're here to raise the level of Yiddishkeit, and now I'll open the floor to questions. And there's silence. And this elderly guy gets up. Now I was 24, elderly could have been 60, but I would say he was post 90. But that's the impression that I get. I don't know really how old he was. An elderly guy, clearly from the shtetl, knew Yiddishkeit from back home. And he said with his gruff Yiddish European accent, where I was raised, we weren't allowed to ask rabbis questions. And he sat down. I said, I don't know if that's a question, if it's a comment, if you want me to address it, but let me just say a few words about it. I said, I was raised in Crown Heights, and I was privileged to stand by many, many talks that the Rebbe gave, called for bring-ins. And not only did the Rebbe encourage questions, not only did the Rebbe want healthy dialogue to take place to understand what his message was, but he also would say, how come no one asked me this question? This was such an obvious statement out of line with what's consistent with Yiddishkeit or consistent with Talmudic teaching. And then he would go on to explain why he said what he said and how it's different, which was part of the Rebbe's creative way of learning, was to show how Yiddishkeit has to be adapted to the time and place. And what needs to be done in America in 1980 is not the same what needs to be done in Europe in 1860 or 1740 or 1620. And the Rebbe's revolutionary way of bringing Yiddishkeit and bringing modernity into Judaism is
Without compromising
without any compromises, showing everything's consistent with Torah law to the nth degree, was part of the way that the Rebbe created this style of learning. And therefore, we were raised by asking questions. I said there was a booklet that was put out by the yeshiva students, my age, little, what we call in my days, whippersnappers, that would question the Rebbe's talk. And I think of it in a preposterous way today. Like the Rebbe said something, he'd be questioning. And not only would the Rebbe enjoy it, but sometimes the Rebbe would come down Friday night to services with this published booklet in his siddur and kind of like scan it while davening was going on. And he was clearly appreciating that the discussion was going on. So the whole Talmud is based on questions, not questioning in a way that you're attacking or insulting or in some way showing a disbelief, but to want to learn, to be able to understand the learning better. So yes, we encourage questions, and that's the way we learn. And it's unfortunate for people that were raised in an environment where they couldn't ask questions. Next guy gets up, and he says, I think he was older than the first guy. And he said, I don't know what you're doing here, but we have 3 synagogues in town, 2 conservative and 1 reform. And we have what's called hoppers, people who hop from one synagogue to the other. You sign up for the first year membership and you say you'll pay and you don't pay. And then they cancel your membership. You go to the second synagogue and you sign up there and you say, I'll pay. And then you don't pay. And you go to the third synagogue. And then by the time you go to the first synagogue, they took you off the list. So you were like a new member. And literally they would hop around and not pay the few $100s a year for membership. And we're fighting for seats and we're fighting for people to come. And we can't even manage with what we have. We don't need more competition. And he sits down. So I said, that's the elephant in the room. Let me address it. I said, I just recently was given the list of Jewish homes in Greater Orlando. And there was just about 5,000 names on the list. You figure 1.2, 1.3, 1.5 names, people per household. It's 7,500 people living in Orlando that the Federation knew about. And I went to all the 3 congregations, and they only have 3,600 seats. Full house, all 3 congregations together. That means from 3,600 to 7,500 plus, that's 3,500 seats that even if you were packed and each one of you filled your house, SRO, standing room only, you would still have no room for another 3,500 people if everyone wanted to come to shul. I said, ladies and gentlemen, my job is to be the rabbi of all those people that you can't fit into your synagogues. So I have actually 3,500 people on my mailing list, on my list of people to meet. I don't know who they are. They don't know who I am. But my goal is to try to find them. And I said, the funny thing is, my congregation is bigger than all your 3s combined. And I got a standing ovation from that response. And that kind of set the tone that, yes, people will come from conservative. Yes, people will come from reform. Yes, people will come from other denominations or from no denominations. But our job is to reach out to every single Jewish person, man, woman, or child. And that's still our mandate.
Now, growing up, obviously in Orlando's not New York. It's still not New York. It's not even Miami. Maybe things have changed over the last, 25, 35 years. But what was it like? What was really the struggle and whether it's kosher, whether it's just getting to meet people or financial struggles that you went through?
So because there was zero infrastructure in traditional observant Judaism, everything became a huge project just to get kosher food provided to us on a regular basis was a monumental undertaking. Just to provide our kids, our children, with a Torah-based Jewish education was a monumental undertaking. Just to get a minyan of services to take place in our home at that time, using our garage as a makeshift shul, was a huge undertaking. And I'm realizing that we're kind of pioneers, like the Daniel Boone of the West. You're not going to say, let's look for a house. You want a house, you're going to build a log cabin. You want to have a source of water, you're going to go dig a well. You want to have a fence, you're going to make your fence. You can't go to Home Depot and buy a fence. Everything you do, everything you make. So I think in those years, what our job was to really establish that this could be done. Now, I wasn't the only one doing it. There was Chabad rabbis that were in many, many other cities, my colleagues all over. Some the same level of Yiddishkeit, some more, but we all had the same challenges and the same opportunities of establishing a presence of Yiddishkeit and saying, you were here to stay, and we're going to make do with whatever it takes to make it happen.
Now I know that there's a story we grew up with, and just on my end, I remember frozen milk boxes coming off the carousel at MCO. I remember having to go to Miami proper, not Coral Springs or Roca, to get almost everything kosher if we wanted anything. I think there was one pizza shop in Miami, and then there was BE Kosher, which was like the store, mind you, 3.5 hours down the road. I remember a little. I remember obviously the only mikveh was. I mean, Miami was pretty much like the nearest hub. What was? I assume it wasn't easy financially. I remember hearing a story about an $8 Shabbos. So what was the proverbial $8? I mean, it wasn't proverbial. It was literally maybe today would be a $50 Shabbos. But what was that like?
So one of the hallmarks of Hasidus is that we don't compromise even in areas of Jewish law where there's availability and room to compromise. There's something in halacha called b'di'evid. B'di'evid means you don't have this, you could go with that. You don't have that, you go with something else. And that line, although halachically acceptable by Hasidim, is a no-no. Because that becomes a slippery slope that eventually leads to a weakening of one's standards. So Chalav Yisrael, which means milk provided by a farm or a place where they actually supervised the making of the milk, has become very it was practiced very little. People found leniencies. Senior rabbis made b'di'evid rulings in places where you don't have milk, places where children need to have the proper nutrients and the proper nutrition. You could serve them chalav akum, not chalav Yisrael. And to us, that was not even a question. So as you mentioned, we would have to go to many considerable effort to be able to find kosher milk.
Real question, did you ever think about buying a cow?
Well, you realize what the cow has to eat every day and how much grass. We would have to have a pretty big farm. But I remember as a bacher shliach going to run a camp in Missouri for Rabbi Weinberg, and part of the summer was what we call Meker Shlichus, was Bachram yeshiva students going around. And one of the jobs I had for Rabbi Weinberg is to go to the farm and pick up raw, unhomogenized, unfiltered milk and bring them in pails or bottles, large milk bottles, to his house so that he would have provided for himself over there. So yeah, the precedent was there. And so each area became its own challenge, its own obligation. The same thing is with meat. There's all kind of compromises. If you can't find meat on this level, then this shechita is acceptable, that kosher certification is acceptable. And again, the slippery slope is always there. And as Hasidim, we knew that we need to get meat that we would eat in Crown Heights, that we would eat in a Chabad Lubavitch community. And although we didn't have, we made do. I remember when my kids would get all excited when fresh milk would come, not frozen, not PC as they called it, because when you freeze milk, it ends up defrosting and a bunch of pieces floating on the top, and it competes with the Cheerios. And, this is the way the children were raised, that we have this priority and this standard, and that's the way we kept it. So, each of those things became its own unique challenge. When we had to go to Miami or a larger city for whatever reason, we would stock up on all the things that we needed. And it was a special opportunity when the kids knew that we went for a visit to a large city that there was.
It was a family trip,
It was
right?
a family trip,
once a week.
celebration. So those years, 1986, 87, even 88, the Rebbe had spoken very, very strongly, vehemently opposed to the law of return in Israel. The law of return was established in 1948 to allow any Jewish person to claim asylum in Israel from anywhere they want in the world. And if there was ever a situation where Jewish people were in trouble, they could come. There's Operation Solomon in Ethiopia, other places where there was large movements. But if a person just came off the boat in Haifa, like the Cubans come off in Miami, and say, I'm Jewish, no questions asked, you become a citizen of Israel. The Rebbe wanted that the words, someone who's Jewish, followed by the words, or converted to Judaism, to add the word kehalacha, according to Jewish law. And that one word caused a huge storm and outcry from the people in Israel that were not supportive of Torah, true Judaism. And they said the word halacha, Jewish law, has no place in a secular government. And the Rebbe said Israel is not a secular government. Israel is a Torah land. Although people don't want to practice it or don't practice it, doesn't make it any less Torah. It's our land, Eretz HaKadosha, Eretz HaKodesh. And the Rebbe spoke very, very strongly about it. The left community, Reform and the left conservative and other liberals, lambasted the Rebbe for mixing in Israeli politics, for imposing his religious zealotry on Judaism around the world. And as the representative of the Rebbe in Orlando, we became a target. And many people who did marry out and were large supporters of Judaism on liberal terms would not support us on those grounds because they felt that we were imposing our religious extreme views on other people. But the Rebbe said this is what we call in Havdalah the separation of Shabbos and the weekdays, the separation of the Jewish people from the rest of the world, the separation between right and wrong, between good and bad, between light and dark. And the Rebbe said God made those separations. We didn't create those divisions. Those rules are meant to be there. And once we take down those walls, then Yiddishkeit doesn't have what to stand on. So the Rebbe used that as a main premise to promote Yiddishkeit in the most core foundational way. We in our community began to feel the impact when people said absolutely no to a meeting or even to discuss what they were doing in town. Surely the answer to supporting us was an outright no. One incident happened where this person became very impressed with what we had to offer, and he said, my office will send you $1,000. That's like today, $20,000. And he called me a few hours later, and he said he's rescinding his pledge. So what happened? He said he called his rabbi, and he said to his rabbi, Rabbi, I did a mitzvah. The rabbi said, what did you do? He said, I gave a pledge to the Chabad rabbi of $1,000. Well, the rabbi read him the riot act about the whole issue, and this gentleman's wife was not Jewish or converted not according to Jewish law. So he asked the rabbi, what should I do? He said, just call the rabbi back and ask him if he would consider Christine, this gentleman's wife, Jewish. And he calls me up and he says, let me ask you a question, Rabbi. Would you consider Christine Jewish? Who's Christine? Well, she is my non-Jewish wife that my Reform rabbi converted, the synagogue just a few years ago. I explained to him, well, Jewish law says, okay, the pledge is rescinded, goodbye. So we're proud to carry that banner of Yiddishkeit with us, but it affected us financially.
Just to sort of weigh in on the not the other side, but along with that, there's a sense of because people, it sounds for a moment, it sounds like it's very obviously Jewish law is very yes or no. It's very binary. Either something is kosher or it's not kosher. But how does that relate to dealing with people who, let's say, don't yet understand or appreciate or accept necessarily the Jewish law as it is?
That's a wonderful question. And that is the greatest paradox of Chabad, Lubavitch, and I would say the Rebbe. Because if you go to certain circles, religious, let's call them ultra-religious. Today it's called Hebrew Haredi. They throw the baby out with the bathwater. Because you don't accept 100% of Torah and all of its details, you categorically aren't Jewish. And therefore, you're a guy. You're not Jewish. We won't count you for a minyan. We won't recognize you as Jewish. And we won't consider you Jewish. And that's how they make the divide. The Rebbe said, Chas v'shalom, God forbid, to point to a Jewish person who's born Jewish or converted to Judaism according to Jewish law, which is the only way to become Jewish, that isn't observant, and to say you're not Jewish. The Rebbe quoted many, many places in the Talmud. Af al pi shachata Yisraelu. Even though he sinned, he is Jewish. There's a law of a murderer who, according to the court of Jewish law, needs to be sentenced to death, which in the Talmud's days, if it happened once in 70 years, was an oddity. That person has to be treated with respect, even in his death, because it says the Spirit of God is with him, and you can't disrespect God, and therefore this sinner with the capital punishment on his soul. And many, many, many other examples. So what is the solution? The solution is that every single Jewish person, whatever level they're on, with warmth, with acceptance, with non-judgmental attitude, and with incredible amount of patience, we encourage Jewish people to learn about their entitled rights and privileges as a Jew.
So maybe this is one of those things I think a lot of people, because it's such a big paradox, and the bigger the paradox, the harder it is to reconcile. People, they take one side. Either what's not okay becomes okay, or because it's not okay, I must not be okay. And I think that there's Hasidic, it has to be Hasidic because you don't see it in other circles. And it's uniquely Chabad in a certain way because it requires a mindfulness, requires a das, requires this ability to differentiate and to reconcile two seemingly opposing forces, which is that you have the person as they are, and then you have what I call their shtick. Their shtick means, they're the things they come with. And I think just like with family and just like with the people we love and the people who in our lives who we respect and care for, just because you care for someone doesn't mean you accept automatically all the things in their life that they do. And on the contrary, I think that in order to, if you want to change someone, if you want to influence someone, you want to educate someone, you can't come with this attack mode. You have to come with this acceptance mode. And we've seen throughout the last, at least I've seen the last, few decades of growing up here in Orlando, that people seem to understand this implicitly or gradually, that they understand that there's something about how they're accepted regardless of their background, regardless of their actions. I know a story, just, a friend of mine would go visit Jews in prison. And, of course, what do you do when you give a bunch of teenagers, a bunch of prison, people start looking up, Google, I wonder what this guy did, everything's public records. And they would go into the cell and they would meet this guy, and he was a nice guy. He was cordial, he was friendly, he accepted them and they accepted him, and it was a very weird experience. And at one point they decided, you know what, let's not look up what the guy did before. And let's just judge him, so to speak, on his merits. Let's just accept him as he is. I don't know what you did. Maybe you're guilty. Maybe you're innocent. Everyone in prison is innocent, right? But it doesn't matter, because you're a Jew. We're Jewish. We're here to meet you. We're here to, have this Jewish experience, whether it's putting on tefillin or just to talk. And the negativity, the background, the reason why you got here is completely inconsequential. And it changed their mindset, not only in the prison system, but also throughout their whole lives.
So I want to address, first of all, the prison, and second of all, the basis upon where the Rebbe got this whole outreach message, which the Chabad practices till today. When I was a yeshiva boy in New Haven, Connecticut, a student rabbi, we went to the prison. Danbury Correctional Institute was the prison that was nearest our yeshiva, and we go there prior to every holiday. And the chaplain told us it's not wise to have a discussion with any of the inmates of why they're there. And I found it very productive not to know. Found out later that one of the people that I was rubbing shoulders with was a hitman for the mafia. It was in there for life. But I only found out that about later, and I was happy that that wasn't the view or the rose-colored glasses that I went into the prison with. Just, you're a Yid, let's learn about Yiddishkeit. So yeah, that's absolutely true. We come with preconceived notions, but we're now celebrating Hanukkah, the season of Hanukkah. The miracle of Hanukkah has many different facets. One of it was a group of young Hasidim, we'll call Maccabees, got up and they said, we're not okay with the status quo, and we're going to revolt against the Greek oppression of preventing us to practice Yiddishkeit. But part of the unwritten story is that they also had to fight the Hellenists, which we would call in Hebrew the Mityavnim, which were Jews that wanted to assimilate. And they were knowledgeable. And they said, enough with Torah and enough with mitzvahs. Let's just be like everybody. Let's just be like everybody else. Kechol hagoyim beis Yisrael. Let's just be like everybody else. Everyone has a culture. We have a culture. Everyone has a holiday. We have a holiday. We're okay with that. But let's not take it to extremes. And they watered down Yiddishkeit to the point that you couldn't tell the difference between a Greek and a Yid. And that part of the war of Matisyahu and his sons, and eventually the victory of Hanukkah, was the miracle of traditional Jewish survival against assimilation. And the way you can do that is not by denouncing people, marginalizing them, excommunicating them, or excluding them. It's by including them. And eventually, the statistical numbers, I think there were 7,000 or so Maccabee soldiers. Eventually, the entire country of Israel rejoined the Hasmonean dynasty, who had controlled Israel for the next 200 years. External of the civil war that was going on amongst the people that came also from assimilationists, from the people who wanted to Hellenize, modernize, modify Yiddishkeit. So the difference between then and now was that most Jewish people, if not all Jewish people, knew what needed to be done and chose a path of either traditional or assimilation. Today, most people that I met in all the 40 years of shluchas in Orlando are completely ignorant. Some of them can't even read Hebrew. Some of them don't know who Rashi was. They surely don't know who wrote the Talmud or where it's based from. They have a lot of floating ideas that they learned from teachers who had axes to grind with Yiddishkeit, who had intentions to make fun of Yiddishkeit. So their skewed, completely misguided view of Yiddishkeit is based on complete ignorance. And that's where organizations like JLI is so impactful, where they said, don't change your practice, just open your eyes and open your mind to learn. Learn, what does it mean? What does the commentary say? Why do we practice? What is the Jewish belief in an afterlife? Do we believe in a soul? Is there such a thing as hell? Which brings us to my first year in Orlando. We started a program called Saturday Night Live with the Rabbi. I know there's a Saturday Night Live show, but our goal...
Even then there were parodies and plays on words.
Our job was to get people away from what I would call the narishkeit of the world, which means wasting your Saturday night doing nothing.
Watching Saturday Night Live.
Or worse, and invite them to my home. My wife and I would prepare a light meal and charge a few dollars a person, and usually filled the house. And we had a topic of relevance and excitement to these people. And they started coming every single week. And we would announce the topic in advance. This is pre-email, this is pre-Twitter, pre-Facebook. So we had to get the message out with cards that were sent a month in advance. And we put 4 weeks in a row what they are. And people would call in to sign up or just come in and listen. And for most people in that room, it was the first opportunity they had to learn anything Jewish in a sensible and mature way. Their level of Yiddishkeit, if they went to Hebrew school, ended at 12 or 13, usually with a negative experience, and that was it. So we're talking about doctors and lawyers and judges and businessmen who are now learning for the first time in their life at age 50 or 60 or 70 what their own tradition says. Are you proud to be Jewish? Sure. Do you know why we fill in the blank? Absolutely no idea. No wonder there would be no interest in practicing Yiddishkeit. So when you educate and you provide an intelligent means of connection to Yiddishkeit, the rest follows.
So, so you mentioned before financial support was an issue, especially standing up for what you believed in, regardless of social influence or denouncing or rescinding pledges and stuff like that. So, what were some of the interesting stories that went along with that?
So the every Shabbos the Rebbe would continue to Farbring, continue to give talks. And of course, we couldn't listen because it's Shabbos and there's no way to record the Rebbe. So after Shabbos, I'd get a phone call from someone who was at the Farbring to give me the highlights. And the Rebbe was always talking about doing more and expanding more, and sometimes addressing the shluchim who weren't in the room, knowing that the message would get out there. So we continued to do programs without support. And it was the miracle of credit. You got a credit card, and they give you a $2,000, $2,500, $3,000 limit. And we had $3,000 to do a program. And if you had enough credit, you'd get an offer to get another credit card. You get pre-approved. To make a long story short, in a very short time, we racked up $60,000 or $70,000 in credit with very little means to pay the minimum payment due. Most of the time, the money came from opening up a new credit card, which gave us the opportunity to pay back other things, but also got us further in debt. It's like digging deeper to get out of the hole that you're in. And it became extremely difficult and taxing. And one day I'm driving with my wife on the road, and I felt this very heavy pressure in my chest. I told my wife, I think I'm having a heart attack. Well, we drove right into the emergency room of a hospital. I was let out and put on a stretcher. And when I told them I think I'm having a heart attack, I was immediately brought in without any wait to be treated, triage. And after a battery of tests, the doctor asked me, would you have any stress in your life that would be a pronounced level? And I said, yeah, why do you ask? He said, because what you just experienced was a stress attack. Your heart's completely fine. Nothing's wrong.
Is that a medical thing? Is that,
yeah. You need to learn how to deal with your stress. So stress can come out in various different ways. Some people, it expresses with sciatica. Some people get headaches. Some people get migraines. Some people get breathing issues. Some people get rashes. The body is a wonderful instrument of God to remind us when we're in pain and to use the necessary precautions. So being discharged, I never was given a room, but I came home and I said, okay, we're going to take a new course of action. And it was a Thursday night, and I laid out all my credit cards on the table, and I think I had 25 of them. And we performed that night what we call plastic surgery, cut up all of our credit cards. And as I'm ready to cut up the last one, I said, maybe we should just keep one as a reserve, because we don't have any money in the bank right now and no savings. So a little lifeline. He said, no, if we go back there, then we're not really committing to what we want to do. And we cut up the last one, and just laying there, just seeing all the cards laid out on the table, it was a relief that we're going to figure out from now on how we're going to pay for everything that we have to pay for, and not live on credit. The next morning, we woke up to the reality that it's Friday. We have to prepare for Shabbos, and no money in the bank. So we scrounge around the house, turning over every couch and opening up every closet and any drawer that could have had coins. We collected a total of $8. We had a frozen chicken in the freezer. We didn't have challah. We didn't have fish. We didn't have vegetables. So we went to the store. And I remember my shopping list was a sack of potatoes, a can of sardines, a box of matzah, and some vegetables. And the bill came to $7.98. And we paid $8 and we got 2 cents change. And we were able to use those 2 cents to put in the tzedakah box before my wife lit the Shabbos candles. And that Friday night, we sat opposite each other at the Shabbos table with no guests. And for the first time, there was a sense of euphoria, a sense of calm. And it was the fact that we don't have to figure out how we're going to pay this $8 back, because we didn't borrow for the first time since we came to Orlando. And after that, we did some self-soul searching, and we realized that one of the areas in Jewish observance that we were deficient in was that we didn't give charity. Now, if you don't make a salary and you don't have any money, you don't have to give you don't have to give tzedakah. But the end of the day is, even if you have overdraft in the bank, but you do buy bread and you do pay your mortgage and you do pay for your car insurance, so money is coming in and money is going out. Although you don't see any, you are living on something and you're not giving charity. And the Torah says that the key to success is to give your obligation of God's share back to Him, which is at least 10%. 20% ideal, more if you need to, but at least 10, ideally 20. So we made a resolution that if money comes in, when money comes in, we will take 10% and give it to charity. And charity means not benefiting you, because we are a 501c3, so we could categorize ourselves over to charity, but that's like putting it from the left pocket to the right pocket. I didn't see that as really giving charity. So we got a $1,000 check that we were expecting in the mail, and as soon as it came, I knew I couldn't deposit it because we were overdrawn. So we did the deposit less cash received, which is a line item on deposit slips that people don't know about today. And you could say, I want to deposit this $1,000 check minus $100. And we took that $100 and we sent it off to a charity. I don't remember which one, but we sent it off. And part of the $1,000 was supposed to pay our electric bill. So the electric notice came that they're shutting off the electric by this date because of lack of payment. And somehow we scrounged around and we found $102 to pay the electric bill before it was cut off. The next month, the electric bill came, the total month was $3. So I called up the electric company and I said, there's been a problem because it's typically between $95 and $105. I got a bill for $3 and I'm concerned. What my biggest concern was that the next week they're going to realize the mistake, it's going to be $200 and we're literally living day by day with what we have. And they said, no, sir, there's no error. You only owe $3. That's all we have a record. So we literally got a month free for power, for electricity that month. But that was the beginning.
And the $100 of tzedakah, which
would
I could say I've seen so many times in my life. 500 out, 500 back in.
So literally, it almost matched exactly. But it was just a sign that we were on the right track. And a short while later, the $60 or something thousand, I don't remember exactly how much we owed in deficit. We got, the Rebbe spoke at a Farbrengen that he received a large inheritance and he's going to give tens of millions of dollars away to all the shluchim. And he said every shliach who's out there should send him a notarized list of expenses signed by a CPA, verified by a CPA that was legitimate what they owed. And the Rebbe would give 10% as a donation to pay off 10% of the debt, and 50% of the debt would be on a long-term loan, no interest, to be paid over 5 years. So I was able to negotiate some of my debt down. I was able to pay some with the Rebbe's loan, pay some people with the gift the Rebbe gave, and the Rebbe literally took me out of the poorhouse and put us on the road.
That was a month after the $100 story?
No, it was, I don't know exactly.
Shortly after.
A little while later, yeah. Mm-hmm. Within a year.
Right. And then there's also the Hyatt, I think, happened shortly after that, right?
Yeah, so then I got a phone call. Before this, I got a phone call from the chief rabbinate of Yerushalayim. It's called the Badatz. And they said, would you go and visit a kosher facility that's shipping orange juice products to Israel? We need to verify the kashrus, the kosher standards. If we send someone, we'd have to fly them to Central Florida. We'd have to rent them a car. We'd have to put them up in a hotel. They're not familiar with the terrain. They don't know the language. You're there. Why don't you just go for us and we'll pay you handsomely? I said, I was never in a kosher facility, in a company. What would I do? Don't worry. It's fairly simple. We'll tell you exactly what to do. Call us from the main office there if you have any questions. This is pre-cell phone days. So reluctantly, I took the job and proudly got paid handsomely. It actually wasn't as difficult as I thought it was. And the office and the production team used terms that I needed to become more familiar with. like pasteurization and distillation and so on and so forth, folder oils and cold pressed oils and on and on and on. And it became known in the industry as the citrus rabbi, where I would visit these facilities and get kosher, provide them with kosher certification, which enabled me to support my family and my kids' tuition and many other things that happened.
Mm-hmm. So it's just and obviously kosher has been something that we in this house we grew up with kosher being almost like a secondary thing that everyone was involved with in some way or another. The kosher hotels and the kosher programs, and Orlando is very well known for the Pesach programs, Pesach villas, which has evolved somewhat. But
I would also share an interesting perspective on what we learned in the course of the first years. Yiddishkeit talks in idealistic terms. And when you filter it down to daily life, it sometimes seems like it doesn't fit. But Yiddishkeit and Hasidism in particular teaches that since God created the world, it has to fit. And when you do it right, it'll happen. So we were raised with this idealism that we need to provide support and help, physical, financial, and spiritual, to whoever reaches out to us. We are the address where people turn to. So it also became the address for people who are scam artists. So before my first child was born, we set aside part of our wedding money for our savings for needs of that. One of the things we set aside for when my wife became pregnant with our first child was furniture for the baby room. And we put away in an account this money. And there's a knock on the door. And this guy comes in. He looks Jewish. And he says, "Rabbi, could you help me? I'm being evicted. I'm going to lose my apartment. Can you help me?" I said, how much do you need? I need at least 1 month's rent. And that was the exact amount of money I had saved for the furniture. But I said, Hashem wants us to do a mitzvah to save someone from being homeless. What greater mitzvah is there than that? So we took the money from the account and we gave it to him. He said, "Rabbi, I feel uncomfortable taking this money from you without some kind of collateral. How about take this and hold this until I bring you the money? It's just a loan." And he takes off this heavy nugget bracelet off his arm, and just holding it, I could feel how heavy it was. He said it was 14 karat gold. He said he got it for his bar mitzvah and never took it off. But he's taking it off for me to hold until he brings me the money back. Wonderful. He leaves. I get a phone call. "Hi, my name is so-and-so. Did my brother Steve come to your house today?" I said, "Steve who?" He said his last name. He says, "Yeah, in fact, he did. And I helped him with to be able to pay his monthly bill." Says, "Oh, I feel so bad. He's the black sheep of the family. We're a wealthy family in New Jersey, and we're so sorry that he came to you. How about if you give me your address, I'll send you $1,000 to compensate for the time and anguish that he caused you." I said, "Oh, beautiful. Thank you." He gave me the address, hung up. I told my wife, "Look at this. We just give tzedakah, and not even an hour later, Hashem is rewarding us with double." Beautiful. So the next day, this guy comes back. He comes back with a van. This van is being driven by someone else. All the windows are covered. And I didn't know what glassy eyes of a drug addict look like. But now that I remember his face, he was on something. And he looked very anxious and he looked very nervous. And he was jumping around. And he said, Rabbi, I'm not okay with having this bill unpaid, this loan. Come with me to the pawn shop and let me get this bracelet pawned in and give you the money back, and you could be home before Shabbos. And my wife is kind of nudging me like, I don't think you should go with this guy. And I said, I'll tell you what. Why don't you take the bracelet and you go and pawn it? Because right now, the way it looks, the closest pawn shop is 35 minutes away. If we're there for half an hour, get home, there won't be enough time for Shabbos. No, Rabbi, you have to come with me. And the more urgent he made it sound, the more convinced I was I'm not going with him. And he almost like blew a fit, like I'm not going with him. But eventually he left with the bracelet. And the whole experience left me very, very unsure of who this guy was. So after Shabbos, I called the number that I received from the brother, quote unquote, and they had no idea who this guy was. So this number was either used by somebody else or that was completely dead end. Then I traveled, we drove to the address that he gave of where he lived. The address didn't exist. So he took the money and left. And, we were out that money. But I don't regret that I did the mitzvah, but it taught us that you have to be a little bit more cautious.
Judicious.
Yeah, a little bit more evaluating who to give. Not everybody that asks deserves. So fast forward 40 years later, which much more savvy, the whole Chabad system. So we would ask questions like, now, where are you coming from? Have a seat. Let me call your brother now. Let me call a member of your family. Who is a rabbi I could call as a reference? And we would help anybody in any circumstance if the case is legitimate. But if the person is just coming to scam, within a very, very short period of time, we'll figure out that the person is not legitimate. Found out later from my colleague in Tampa that he was there the month before and scammed them out of a few $100s. And, so there are people that make their rounds to the Chabad centers and do their thing. But I'm thinking about how the Baal Shem Tov has stories about him that the stranger shows up in the middle of the night and he gives him his house and he lets him stay in a guest room. And how does he know the guy's not a killer? How does he know the guy's
he's
not?
Tov, so
Okay,
he
the Baal
knows.
Shem Tov knows, but the stories are told to us like that's the way we're supposed to be hospitable. That's the way we're supposed to have an open home. And Abraham had every single kind of person, a guest in his house. He didn't ask them for a background check before he invited them to his dinner table to have a meal. So we just live in different times, and we have to learn to use common sense and logic and not put our children in harm's way when we're trying to help people in need. It was just a learning process about how to actually apply this unlimited devotion to charity and helping someone in need and making sure that we're actually helping someone and not harming them.
I think today the CIA, the Chabad intelligence agency, as soon as one piece of data gets shared with one rabbi, it right away. I think first of all, cell phones and such, it's instantaneous.
Right.
You put one thing on a WhatsApp group. By the way, don't give this guy or someone's up to no good. Verification and things like that. You can call right away.
Even we have issues now. People want to come to shul, and you look, you do an image search and find out he's wanted or he's a molester or something like that. It becomes a real issue where we accept everyone unconditionally on all terms. And how do you actually implement that in a proper and a safe way? Remember going back to New York, one of the annual conventions of all the shluchim, and we had one of the shliachs in Berkeley, California. He said that there was a guy who came in one day. He said to the shliach, "I'm here to do whatever you need. I could help you with." He said, "What do you do?" He says, "I'm a chef." He says, "Okay, make dinner tonight and see how you do." Turns out he was really a chef. Amazing job. So for a week and a half, Berkeley has a bunch of rooms for students. He stayed in the dorm. No one knew his name. No one knew his background. He clearly was Jewish. And he was working as a chef in the kitchen. He was doing a phenomenal job. Until one day, 2 FBI agents show up. And they asked the rabbi, "Have you ever seen this guy?" And it's 8x10 glossy of him. He shows up. He says, "He actually is working in the kitchen right now. He's in our kitchen. He's the chef." They walk into the kitchen. He's gone. He was one step ahead of them. And they asked him, "Do you have any names, any numbers, anything?" The rabbi had nothing on him. He just knew there was a yid, there was a need, and he had this ability to help. And he was in this Chabad center. Turns out he's wanted by the FBI from some very serious crimes. Obviously today it would be very, very different. But 35 years ago, these were the stories that we shared about how to implement this home of goodness, of education, and of prayer. Gimel Chasadim, Torah, and Avodah in a way that you actually can keep everyone safe and secure.
So I think that there's skits today about Chabad shluchim, how they go out in the first couple months, and then how things evolve very quickly through the school of hard knocks, through experience, learning how to act in the real world. It reminds me of this rabbi who's asked if he's fluent in the 5 books of Code of Jewish Law. So the rabbi says, as far as I know, there's only 4 books. He says the 5th book is the book of common sense. You have to know how to, in addition to all the laws, you have to know how to just read the room. So I'm guessing that in all the years of shluchas, one of the most important lessons you got was not only from the books you read and from the experiences you had, but also sort of maybe learning from the experiences and saying, maybe we should double check or triple check, trust but verify.
So I think one of the most important qualifications to be a shliach, above everything, is common sense. Because learning, you could always learn. How to do something, you could learn how to do something. If you lack information, you could get information. Today, you could find the answer to almost anything. So whether the person is more learned or less learned, the Rebbe wanted everyone to learn, whatever wanted everyone to have, not just basic knowledge, but to be able to have a healthy Jewish conversation with any Jewish person, whatever level of Yiddishkeit and knowledge base they have. But if you don't have common sense, if you don't have menschlichkeit, if you don't have the basic components of how to make a decision, how to think on the spur of a moment, what to do, that's something you can't train someone.
Where do you get that from?
I personally think Hasidus teaches you how to do it. When you learn Hasidus, they say about Hasidim that you can't be ignorant and you can't be a fool. If you learn Hasidus, you're going to learn very quickly. The previous Rebbe writes in his memoirs, the previous Rebbe was a prolific writer. He wrote a diary every single day of his life. Most of it's unpublished because it's personal things that happened to him or things that he wanted to record. But some things he published, a lot was published. One of the things he writes is on the day of his bar mitzvah in 1893, his father gives him a blessing. And he says to him, rule number 1 is don't ever fool yourself. Don't talk yourself into something that isn't true. Don't fool yourself. Nar sich nicht. The second thing he said, even more important, is don't fool others. Na nicht kein Zweiten. Don't fool people. People will see right through what they call in Yiddish Falschkeit. Not lie. Trick. Try to fool somebody. And the third, which I think is the most important, and that's the common sense, don't let other people fool you. Learn to read a person, and you don't have to let them know, but you have to know their number. Is this guy legit? Is this guy a Drake up? Is this guy serious about who he is? And sometimes we don't read a person properly. Sometimes we don't know. You have to be a real tzaddik. Like the Rebbe traveled incognito as a young man, and he came to a shul, and the old Belzer Rebbe was there who was blind, and he had a towel because he didn't want to touch people with his hand. People said Good Shabbos to him with the towel. You held the towel. And hundreds of people walked by Friday night, and that was the custom. You didn't leave shul unless you said Good Shabbos to the rabbi. And he was blind. And he was like Good Shabbos to whoever touched his hand. Good Shabbos, Good Shabbos. When the Rebbe came by, this blind rabbi, the Belzer Rebbe, takes off the towel and wants to hold the Rebbe's hand. And he takes his hand with his other hand, the Rebbe's hand, and he said, Wer bist du? Who are you? This blind rabbi. And the Rebbe says, A junger Mann. The Rebbe says, but who are you? The point was that the Rebbe, the Belzer Rebbe, felt the Rebbe's presence from where he was. But that's a tzaddik. But we're taught to always keep that the eye of common sense open. Never be blind to realize who you are and respect people where they are. The Rebbe spoke to people of all levels of Yiddishkeit, from the most profound to the simplest, and everyone got a genuine respect as a person. This is a tzelem Elokim. This is an image of God walking. Whether it's a little child that Rebbe handed a dime for tzedakah with a smile, whether it was a sage, whether it was a famous writer who wrote against Yiddishkeit. A rabbi, one of these famous maskilim came to the Rebbe, and these free thinkers who have to denounce Yiddishkeit. And the first words the Rebbe said to him, he says, I read your articles. And he said, you do? Like he was shocked that the Rebbe would even read his article. And the Rebbe said, you're an excellent writer. Just because I don't agree with your position on life, I can't read what you have to say. Right away, the Rebbe won over this person as a person. So we have extremely opposite, diametrically opposed views. Does that mean you're any less of a person? So to be in a genuine communication with someone, you don't have to agree with them, you don't have to support them, you don't have to have anything in common other than the fact that there's a genuine connection between two people. How much more so if there's substance, and how much more so if there's a Jewish soul-to-soul conversation. You're talking to a person that God endowed with a Jewish soul. They deserve a certain recognition, a certain acknowledgement. Does it mean we have to agree with them? Of course not. But at least give them the credence of what a human, what a Jewish soul deserves to have.
So this touches on, I think, the biggest theme in Chabad, which is the biggest theme in Hasidism, which is obviously the biggest theme in Judaism, which is Avas Yisrael, loving your fellow Jew. And someone said, why does it say your fellow Jew, not your fellow man? It says, because it's very easy to love everybody. It's to love the guy, to love your neighbor, to love the person next to you, to love the person you deal with on a regular basis. I think
there's a part in the Torah portion we're reading now about the story of Jacob and his sons. We have a story of Joseph being sold as a slave in Egypt. And the Torah tells us that they sold their brother Joseph for 20 shekels. And the Talmud says, like, what's the significance of the 20 shekels? So it says basically 10 brothers, and each one got $2 out of it. Those are your 20 shekels. And that's why you're supposed to give a half shekel, because it turns out that each person gave a half shekel, and the 10 silver coins, which is the 20 silver pieces, it ends up to be half shekels. So the Rebbe says, 1 second. If you read the story, Reuven wasn't there, because he said, throw him in the pit, and then he's gone. Meanwhile, they sell him. He comes back, and it says, Ein Yosef Babar. If he's not there, you only have 9. So the Rebbe gives 2 answers, and both of them relate to Avos Yisrael. The first one is, Reuven walks away when a Jew's in trouble. Like, doesn't that give him some culpability in this story? So what, you weren't there? Your brother...
Well, that's why later on he basically has some soul searching.
Exactly. So he becomes responsible by omission, not by commission. Then the Rebbe has another take that it was Joseph was the 10th. Because the Baal Shem Tov has a quote that when a Jew does harm, you have to have compassion on him for the harm that he did. And Joseph had to bear some responsibility for fomenting this hatred by telling the brothers, hey, I had another dream. I think you bowed down to me. Hey, this time I'm the sun, the moon, the stars. That some responsibility. And both of them have to do with the way you interact with your brothers, the way you interact with Yiddishkeit. And the Rebbe said, the Hira Nifla'a, the amazing lesson that we learned to how far we have to go. Reuven's not even present, but somehow the Torah considers him responsible. Yosef is the victim, and the Torah says you have to also take some responsibility in this story. And the Rebbe applied it to today, in the 1970s, when the Rebbe said the talk, is that when you see a Yid in the street, and he's in the proverbial pit filled with snakes and scorpions, we can't ignore them. These are one of these classic shlichus sichos where the Rebbe said, you're sitting in Brooklyn with a pizza shop and a bakery and a kosher place to daven and learn, and there's a Yid wandering in the street in Manhattan and doesn't even know where he is, and spiritually is in a snake and scorpion pit. How do you live with yourself? So that this motivation to always be there for others, and the job ain't done until the job is done. So as long as there's a Yid in need somewhere, we have obligation to do whatever we can to be there for them. There's 1,000 reasons and 1,000 excuses, but it still doesn't solve the problem that there's a Yid out there.
So I always find it interesting talking about Yosef. We always seem to read the portion of Yosef and his brothers the exact same week as Yutes Kislev. And it is interesting that, just like the brothers sold out Yosef, it seems very much that there was a selling out of sorts with the Alter Rebbe going to prison, which is, literally be throwing him in. There were certain individuals, Jewish individuals, who were responsible for that, who put him into a prison cell, snakes and scorpions, as you said. But then the Alter Rebbe not seeing himself as the victim per se, seeing himself as, if this is what I'm supposed to go through, I have to go through, but how do I become stronger through this? And never having that sense of animosity or angst or vendetta against the brothers that sold him out. And on the contrary, then after coming out of prison, becoming the viceroy of Egypt, and inviting his brothers in and really proving to them almost to the rest of his life, literally to the rest of his life and their lives, that he's still their brother and we're on the same side, and that this is all part of this divine plan.
So it's very interesting that you mentioned that, because in all the talks that I've heard or read about the Rebbe and the previous Rebbes, all the way back to the Alter Rebbe himself, who in 1798 was released from prison on Yutes Kislev, on the 9th day of Kislev, they always focused on the positive message, which is now our job is to spread Yiddishkeit and Hasidic teachings to the world. Yafutzu ma'inasecha chutza, take the well springs and spread them forward, and almost never addressing the fact that there was a bunch of Jewish people involved in the Alter Rebbe getting arrested, and the realistic threat of death that he was imposed.
And it wasn't the last time that happened as well.
And the Rebbe always redirected the conversation about how to do this. The Rebbe talked extensively on Yutes Kislev's, all throughout the generations, the Rabbeim spoke about Pada b'Sholom Nafshi, that King David had enemies within his own ranks, even within his own family. And what he prayed is that the enemy should become his friends, not that he should become eliminated. Because if you live in the world of eliminating your enemy, eventually everyone becomes an enemy and everyone can be eliminated. What about the enemy within you? We all have a little guy that's running around in our brain and our heart. Get rid of him too. How many fingers and hands do you want to chop off? So if you go with the premise that every Yid potentially could be rehabilitated and brought around with the right education, with the right warmth, with the right joy infused with the teachings of Hasidus, then everyone is rehabilitatable.
So I think this is also a very archetypically Chabad perspective, is that we're not trying to get rid of all the anti-Semites. We're not trying to, kill the opposition, but rather transform the opposition and really educate. And I think that it requires a lot of patience. It requires, especially what's going on today in the world of social media, and a misrepresentation of what Judaism is and who Jews are and what we believe and what we represent and what the Talmud is, yada, yada, yada. It all comes down to, let's sit down, let's calm down for a second, let's have a conversation, let's discuss, what are these sources, where do they come from, what's the origin of these? And we know that a lot of the anti-Semitism that we saw over the last, even recently, the last 100 years, was all based on misinformation. It was all based on propaganda from certain, interest groups that they knew exactly how to put the right soundbite in the, in the wrong context, and basically destroy an argument from within. And I think that one of the challenges of today, but also one of the greatest opportunities, is to reverse that back and to put everything back in place. The fragmentation of information as it fell out of its proper context, to put it back in its proper context.
So getting back to Yutes Kislev theme, from the beginning of the Torah until this week's Parsha, or the portion of Vayeshev, you have a villain and you have a good guy. You have Cain, you have the snake, and you have Chava. And then you have Cain and Abel, Cain and Hevel. You know who the bad guy is. The guy who kills his brother is the bad guy. And then you go to the generation of Enosh, and you go to the generation of the flood. Every generation, every story, from the beginning till Yaakov and his children, Yaakov himself, Yaakov and Esav. And then you have Lavan and Yaakov, and so on. When you have this week's Torah portion, and it talks about the brothers, there's no villains. There's bad behavior and there's good behavior. The classic teachings, the Rebbe says, you never tell a child you're bad. You say you did something wrong. You did something bad. That's a bad way of thinking. That's a bad way of talking, because you have an neshama. Now, if you take it on the cosmic level, the Pada b'Sholom theme of Yutes Kislev, the Maimarim that the Alter Rebbe speaks about this profound concept that in the core of the entire world is the existence of God, and God doesn't have a villain. In the secular world, in the pagan world, there's God against the things that are against him. In the Torah world, there is only God. So what becomes an opposition is not opposition to God. In reality, it's just a presence of conflict.
Or an illusion.
An illusion of conflict. It has to be overcome. So when we take the peel off the fruit or take the shell off the nut, you really have bad and good. But in the core world, in the essence, we'll call, in the Hasidic terminology, Pnimius Atik, There's only him. There's nothing bad. So why is there bad? Because the world is allowed to function in this perception of evil. Our job, Hasidis's job, and the Shluchim's job, and its extension of every Yid, and eventually the whole world, is to reveal the goodness and godliness within everything. And therefore, what emerges is that the negativity is a negative and the opposition is an opposition. It's not how do I convince the opposition to agree with me. There is no opposition when the truth surfaces. And that's what Hasidus is. You don't have to fight the darkness in the room. You light a candle. The darkness will dissipate because it has no substance. It has no energy and self-support independent of God. And that's the lesson of Yudas Kislev is first fix your own demons and delusions, and then the rest of the world will follow. The problem is in our core, we have our own issues that we need to resolve. And that's why when Hasidim get together or you celebrate Yudas Kislev, it's about bringing and reaching in to try to deal with our own core, with our own inconsistencies, with our own challenges, with the things that hold us back from doing what we have to do, and then the rest of the world will follow.
I think it's a good outro. There's so much to talk about. We can go for another few hours, but the sun is setting, and there's much to be done. So thanks so much for coming on. This is a synopsis. It's a portal. We talk a lot about the hallway with the many doors. There's so many doors you can go down, but this is part one to be continued.
Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Our pleasure. This was an interesting conversation. What can I say? The core, the paradoxes, the various challenges that we go through, the illusions. I once heard someone say, there was I had many problems in life, and Rebbe says problems just illusion, and now no more problems. So we have to see the good in everything, and overcome the challenges, transform the challenges into opportunities, and that will be the Hasidic New Year is coming up this week. So we shall all have a happy, healthy New Year. Yudas Kislev, and like, comment, subscribe. We'll see you on the next episode.